Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, but your body is telling you everything is wrong? In today's story, we meet a high achiever, someone who never misses a deadline and always says, "I'm fine." But after weeks of no sleep and constant pressure, the wall finally crumbles in the most unlikely place, the office parking lot. We're diving into the Burnout Meltdown. As we follow this journey from the 4 AM Mirage to the moment of total collapse, we're going to learn how to describe high-stress situations in English. We'll explore idioms like burning the candle at both ends and what happens when you finally hit a wall. If you've ever felt the weight of expectations, this story is for you. Let's look at how we deal with real-life problems and improve our English one chapter at a time.
4 a.m. The sound doesn't just wake you up, it cuts through the dark like a cold blade. James didn't move his head. He didn't even blink. He just stared at the ceiling, watching the pale shadows of a passing car crawl across the white plaster. His eyes felt heavy, like they were filled with dry, gritty sand. This was day 22, or was it 23? He had stopped counting the days. Now he only counted the hours of sleep he didn't get. 3 hours last night, 2 the night before. He sat up slowly, his joints creaking in the silence. The room was freezing, but he didn't reach for a blanket. He reached for the glowing screen on his nightstand. The laptop was still warm. The small power light was blinking steadily. Blink, blink, blink. It was a silent, mocking reminder of the 64 unread emails that had arrived since midnight. 64 people wanting a piece of his time. 64 problems that only high achiever James could solve. "I'm fine," he whispered to the empty room. The words felt thin. They sounded like glass about to crack under too much pressure. He walked to the kitchen, his bare feet hitting the hardwood floor with a dull thud. The floorboards groaned, protesting the early hour. In the corner, the coffee machine was already hiss and gasping. It was his only true companion at this hour. He watched the dark, oily liquid drip, drip, drip into his favorite ceramic mug. He was burning the candle at both ends. Everyone at the office praised his grit. His boss loved his unwavering dedication. They saw the polished reports and the quick replies. But standing here, in the ghostly blue light of the open refrigerator, James didn't feel dedicated. He felt hollow. He felt like an old battery that could no longer hold a charge. He took a sip of the coffee. It was bitter. It was scalding. He welcomed the burn on his tongue because it forced him to feel something other than exhaustion. He needed the caffeine to build the mask he wore every single day. Just one more week, he lied to himself. One more deadline. One more successful launch. Then I'll rest. But the sun wasn't even up yet, and the weight of the entire world was already sitting heavy on his chest. The mirage of productivity was calling him back to the desk. James set the mug down, opened the lid of his laptop, and began to type. 10 a.m. The office was humming with the sound of 100 small distractions. Telephones ringing, printers whirring, the low murmur of colleagues discussing their weekends. But for James, the world had narrowed down to a single point, the glowing rectangle of his monitor. Inbox 0. He whispered the words like a prayer. He had just archived the last email. For a split second, the screen was white and empty, a perfect digital slate. But before he could even take a full breath, the notification chime rang. Ding. 3 new messages. 2 marked urgent, 1 marked high priority. James felt a strange, cold flutter in his chest. It wasn't heart palpitations, not yet. It was the feeling of a spirit that had reached its limit. He was performing perfectly. On the outside, he was a machine. His posture was straight, his suit was crisp, his replies were professional and concise. But inside he was starting to rebel. He reached for his coffee mug, but his hand began to shake, just a tiny, rhythmic tremor in his thumb. He gripped the ceramic handle harder, forcing the muscle to stay still. He couldn't let anyone see the glitch. "Hey, James, you got a second to look at the quarterly projections?" It was Sarah, the marketing lead. She was leaning against his desk, holding a printed report. She looked energized. She looked like she had slept 8 hours. James turned his head slowly. He felt like his neck was made of rusted iron. He forced his lips into a shape that looked like a smile. "Of course, Sarah," he said. His voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "Put it on the pile. I'll have it back to you by noon." Sarah nodded and walked away, satisfied. She didn't notice the way his eyes struggled to focus on her face. She didn't see the way he breathed, shallow, quick breaths that never quite reached his lungs. He was keeping up appearances. He looked back at the screen. The white light felt blinding now. The letters started to swim, swirling into meaningless shapes. He closed his eyes for a moment, just a moment, and for a second he forgot where he was. Ding! Another email. The spirit was at 0, but the inbox was never satisfied.
2 p.m. The fluorescent lights overhead didn't just illuminate the room. They seemed to vibrate. To James, the hum of the building was becoming a physical weight. He was standing by the water cooler, holding a paper cup. He stared at the tiny bubbles rising in the blue plastic tank. Gloop, gloop. It was the most interesting thing he had seen all day. "James? You okay, man?" The voice was soft, but it hit James like a physical blow. He flinched, nearly spilling the water on his polished shoes. It was David, a junior analyst. David was young, observant, and, worst of all, kind. James didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. His brain was searching for the right words, but the library was closed. The syntax of silence had taken over. "I'm fine, David, just deep in thought about the merger," James said. The lie felt heavy in his mouth. He wasn't thinking about the merger. He was thinking about how much his skin hurt. He was thinking about how his ears were ringing. David tilted his head. "You look a bit pale. Maybe you should call it a day. The weather's nice outside. Go for a walk?" James felt a sudden, sharp surge of irritation. A walk? A walk wouldn't fix the mountain of spreadsheets on his desk. To James, David's kindness felt like a threat. It felt like someone was trying to pull a loose thread on a sweater that was already falling apart. If he admitted he was tired, the whole image would vanish. The high performer would be gone. "I've got it under control, David," James snapped. The silence that followed was awkward. It was thick and uncomfortable. David blinked, surprised by the tone. He nodded slowly and backed away. James watched him go. He wanted to apologize. He wanted to say, "I'm sorry, I haven't slept in weeks and I don't know who I am anymore." But he didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he crushed the paper cup in his hand. The sound of the paper breaking was the only thing he could say. He turned around and walked back to his desk, stepping back into the light, back into the mask.
3:30 p.m. The boardroom felt like a vacuum. 10 executives sat around the long mahogany table, their eyes fixed on the screen at the front of the room. James stood at the head of the table. The laser pointer in his hand was casting a tiny red dot on a graph of rising profits. On the screen, the numbers looked perfect, but in James's mind, there was only static. "As you can see," James began. His voice sounded hollow, like it was echoing from the bottom of a well. The quarterly acquisition of the... He stopped. The word was right there. It was a simple word, a word he had used 1,000 times, but his brain had suddenly disconnected from his tongue. He looked at the graph. The lines started to vibrate. The red dot from the laser pointer began to dance wildly against the wall because his hand would not stop shaking. The silence in the room stretched. It grew heavy. It grew loud. James looked at his boss, Mr. Henderson. Henderson was frowning, his pen hovering over a notepad. The glitch was no longer a secret. The mask was starting to slip in front of the people who mattered most. "James," Henderson asked, "are you with us?" James felt a drop of cold sweat slide down his spine. The static in his head was getting louder, a white noise that drowned out the air conditioning and the breathing of his colleagues. He felt out of his depth for the first time in 10 years. "My apologies," James managed to say. He forced his eyes to focus. He forced his lungs to take in air. "The projected synergy for the third quarter is based on..." He finished the sentence, but he didn't hear the words. He was operating on pure muscle memory. He was a ghost piloting a body that was screaming for the lights to go out. The presentation ended 5 minutes later. There was polite applause, but the air in the room had changed. People didn't look at him with admiration anymore. They looked at him with concern. And to James, concern felt a lot like failure. He packed his laptop with trembling fingers. He had survived the meeting, but he knew the static wasn't going away. It was just getting started.
7 p.m. James sat across from his brother, Mark, at a small corner table. The restaurant was warm, smelling of roasted garlic and expensive wine. It was supposed to be a celebration, a catch-up dinner that had been rescheduled 4 times already. But for James, the menu was a wall of gibberish. He had been staring at the same 3 lines of text for 5 minutes. "I'm telling you, James, the kids miss you," Mark said, leaning forward. "Leo keeps asking when his cool uncle is going to come over and play video games again." James forced his eyes to leave the menu. He looked at Mark's face, but he felt miles away. It was as if he were watching a movie with the sound turned off. "Yeah," James said. The word felt dry. "Soon. Work is just... it's a lot right now." Mark's smile faded slightly. He put his fork down and looked closely at his brother. "You said that every month since Christmas, man. Honestly, you look like a ghost. Are you even sleeping?" James felt a flash of that same irritation from earlier. It was the safety valve in his brain tightening. If he admitted he wasn't sleeping, he would have to admit he wasn't winning, and James didn't know how to be anything other than a winner. "I'm swamped, Mark, that's all. It's just a busy season." "Busy shouldn't mean dead behind the eyes," Mark countered softly. The waiter arrived, but James couldn't make a decision. The choice between chicken or fish felt as high stakes as a multi-million-dollar merger. His brain simply refused to process the options. "I'll have what he's having," James muttered, pointing at Mark's closed menu. The rest of the dinner was a blur of nodding at the right times and pretending to chew. He was physically there, but mentally he was back in the office parking lot, or staring at his inbox, or falling into the black hole of his own exhaustion. He was going through the motions. He was a shell, and the worst part, he could tell that Mark knew. "I have to go," James said abruptly, before the dessert arrived. "I have a call with Tokyo at 9. He didn't have a call. He just couldn't stay in the warmth any longer. He needed the cold. He needed the silence of his car. 8:15 p.m. The interior of the car was dark.
The only light came from the orange glow of a distant street lamp in the corner of the office parking lot. James sat in the driver's seat, but he didn't put the key in the ignition. He didn't turn on the heater. He didn't even take off his seatbelt. He just sat there. The silence was heavy. It was the first time in 3 weeks he wasn't hearing a phone notification, a laptop fan, or a colleague's voice. And in that silence, the static from earlier turned into a roar. Suddenly, a single sob escaped his throat. It was a strange, jagged sound. He tried to swallow it, tried to pull the mask back into place, but the mask was gone. It had shattered in the boardroom. It had dissolved at dinner. Then the floodgates opened. James leaned his forehead against the cold leather of the steering wheel and cried. He didn't just weep, he crumbled. He cried for the sleep he had lost. He cried for the brother he couldn't talk to. He cried for the man he used to be, the one who actually liked his life. He was at the end of his tether. Every "I'm fine" he had spoken over the last month felt like a physical weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The air in the car felt thick and hot. His suit jacket felt like a straitjacket. He reached out to touch the dashboard, his fingers trembling. This car, this job, this life, it was everything he had worked for. So why did it feel like a cage? He wasn't a high achiever anymore. He wasn't a leader or a Rockstar employee. He was just a tired man in a dark parking lot, finally admitting that he couldn't carry the world on his shoulders alone. He had hit a wall, and this time he couldn't climb over it.
8:40 p.m. The crying had stopped, but the silence that followed was even louder. James remained slumped over the steering wheel. His face felt hot and tight from the salt of his tears. In the small enclosed cabin of the car, his thoughts began to echo. "What are you doing?" the voice in his head hissed. "Get it together. You have a reputation. You have a career. People are counting on you." This was his internal critic. For years, this voice had been the engine of his success. It was the voice that told him to drink one more coffee, stay one more hour, and send one more email. But tonight, for the first time, the voice sounded like a stranger. It sounded like an enemy. James lifted his head and looked into the rearview mirror. In the dim orange light, his own reflection startled him. His eyes were bloodshot and his skin looked gray. He looked like a man who had been running on empty for a lifetime. He realized then that the critic was wrong. The people counting on him didn't need a machine. Mark didn't need a high achiever. Mark needed a brother. He reached for his phone, which was sitting in the cup holder. It buzzed. A calendar notification. Prep for 8 a.m. strategy session. James stared at the glowing screen. For a decade, he had been a slave to that buzz. But as he sat in the quiet cabin, he felt a flicker of something new. It wasn't energy, it was clarity. He was burnt out. The fire wasn't just low, the wood was gone, the ash was cold. "I can't go back in," he whispered. He wasn't talking about the office building, he was talking about the way he had been living. The echoes in the cabin were finally telling him the truth. He had reached the point of no return.
"9 p.m. The cool breeze felt like a shock to James's system. It brushed against his damp face, helping to clear the fog in his mind. He took a long, shaky breath, tasting the metallic scent of city air and rain. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a travel-sized pack of tissues. He began the cold recovery. He wiped his eyes, cleaned his grasses, and straightened his tie. It was a mechanical process, a way to regain his composure. He looked at the office building one last time. The lights on the 14th floor were still on. His colleagues were still up there, chasing deadlines, trapped in the same cycle he had just escaped. He realized he couldn't just drive home and pretend this hadn't happened. If he went home and slept, he would wake up tomorrow and try to be high achiever James again. He needed to make a move while the clarity was still fresh. He picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over his boss's name. His heart began to hammer against his ribs. "No," he muttered, "not tonight." Instead, he opened his personal messages. He found the thread with his brother. With shaking fingers, he typed, "I'm not okay. Can I come over?" He hit send. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Mark was waiting. "Doors open, man. Always." James finally put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low growl. He didn't check his work email. He didn't look at his calendar. He put the car in gear and drove out of the parking lot, leaving the Rockstar version of himself behind in the shadows. He was turning a corner. It was the first step in a very long walk back to himself.
6 a.m. The sun was just starting to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and soft pink. James sat at his kitchen table. He wasn't wearing his suit. He was wearing an old, oversized hoodie and holding a mug of tea, not coffee. For the first time in a decade, he hadn't checked his phone the moment his eyes opened. He stared at the blank document on his screen. This was the resignation of the ego. He wasn't just quitting a job, he was quitting the idea that his value was tied to his output. He began to type. "Dear Henderson, I am writing to inform you that I will be taking an immediate leave of absence." He stopped. The old James would have written a 3-page apology. He would have explained the projects, the deadlines, and the synergy. He would have tried to sugarcoat the truth to protect his reputation. But the man sitting at the table didn't care about his reputation anymore. He cared about his survival. He deleted the sentence and started again. "I have pushed myself past the breaking point. For my health and my future, I need to step away. I will not be reachable for the next 30 days. His finger hovered over the send button. This was the moment he officially stepped down from the pedestal he had built for himself. He felt a wave of nausea, followed by a strange light feeling in his chest, like a heavy backpack had finally been cut from his shoulders. Click. The email was gone. The silence that followed wasn't the scary, ringing silence of the car. It was peaceful. He had admitted his weakness, and in doing so, he had found a new kind of strength. He was no longer the man who has it all together. He was just James, and for today, that was more than enough.
Three months later. The afternoon sun felt warm on James's neck as he sat on a park bench. He wasn't looking at a spreadsheet or a slide deck. He was watching a group of kids attempt to fly a kite. He looked at his watch. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. In his old life, this hour would have been a blur of back-to-back meetings and cold espresso. He would have been on the clock, pushing his mind to the limit. Now he was simply on the bench. He had started a new role at a smaller firm. The pay was less and the title was humbler, but the boundaries were made of steel. He left at 5. He didn't sync his work email to his personal phone. He had established a new baseline. "Uncle James, look!" A small boy ran toward him, tripping over his own shoelaces before collapsing into the grass with a giggle. It was Leo.
James didn't flinch at the noise. He didn't feel the phantom itch to check his pocket for notifications. He just laughed, reached down, and helped his nephew up. "Great flight, Leo," James said. His voice was steady. It was grounded. He still had days where the internal critic whispered that he was falling behind. He still had moments where he felt the urge to overextend himself just to prove he was still the best. But then he would remember the cold silence of the parking lot. He would remember the taste of the salt on his lips. He was learning that rest wasn't a reward you earned after you finished your work. Rest was the foundation that made the work possible. He wasn't a machine. He was a human being, and for the first time in years, he was finally living like one. James took a deep breath of the fresh park air. He wasn't running anymore. He was just here.
James's story reminds us that success isn't worth much if you lose yourself along the way. Crying in a car wasn't his failure, it was his wake-up call. How about you? Have you ever had to call it a day because things became too much? Or are you currently burning the candle at both ends? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on finding balance. To help you master these expressions, I've put together a full idiom list in the description box below. You can practice using them in your own life. Also, don't forget to scroll down to the quiz section in the description. Test your knowledge on today's story and see if you can pick the right phrases for each situation. If this story helped you with your English or gave you a bit of perspective on your busy week, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, take a breath, set a boundary, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.